forth the consensus process as the method for reaching decisions for public policy. And one of the requirements of Agenda 21 was to create a national mechanism for the implementation of Agenda 21. And true to the instruction, our illustrious president, by executive order, created the President's Council on Sustainable Development in 1993. And belief number 8, published by that 28-member council, says we need a new decision-making process, a collaborative process which reaches faster decisions and makes better use of resources to achieve our goals. Our being 28 appointed members of the President's Council on Sustainable Development. Since that time, the entire administration has adopted the consensus process through stakeholder councils and public-private partnerships as a method for achieving public policy, thereby bypassing our elected officials. What makes our country great is the fundamental principle that government is just when it arises from and is empowered by the consent of the governed. The only way we have to give our consent to laws and the public policy that is created by our representatives is at the ballot box. Now, who are you going to unelect because the particulate standard is now 2.5 microns? That wasn't Congress that did that. It was Carroll and her clan. And Bonner's going to tell you about her tomorrow. But I point this out because it is one of the most important erosions of the principles of American freedom that we are confronted with today. And it is a part of the global governance that is arising to enforce the mandates of the brain that Robert Mueller has identified. There are several key components of global governance. Now, all of you for years, those of you whose hair is as gray as mine, know that since you were a kid, you've seen signs about get the U.S. out of the UN and the UN out of the U.S. And you've heard all kinds of conspiracy theories about the United Nations wanting to take over the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that all of those conspiracy theories have been laid to rest. The United Nations funded what is called a Commission on Global Governance. Maurice Strong was one of the primary people. I won't go into the backgrounds of the members of that commission, but it was a 28-member commission. There's something magical about the number 23 and about the number 28. But this commission worked for several years, and in 1995 it published its final report called Our Global Neighborhood. And if you want to see what the United Nations plan is to achieve global governance by the year 2000, you must read the book. It was published by Oxford University Press. They published it in paperback and in hardback. The paperback version was $14.95. The minute it came out, we began to publicize it. They sold out almost instantly, and they're not reprinting. There is, however, a complete copy on our website. Now write this down. Freedom.org. That's our website. Freedom.org. Go there. Explore. Plan to spend a lot of time. Our Global Neighborhood is on the website. Read it. And I'll tell you just a few things to look out for. I should also tell you that Maurice Strong, who was on that commission and responsible for much of what that book contains, as soon as that job was finished, he was appointed executive coordinator of the United Nations in charge of reform. Now, that should give you a lot of comfort. After writing out all of what the United Nations should do, he was employed to go do it. And last July, he wrote his first report of the reforms that are underway. I'll tell you about those in a minute or two, but first let me tell you a few of the more important recommendations contained in our global neighborhood. One of the things that's most important is, according to our global neighborhood, the United Nations should convene, it says, in the year 1998, a world conference to adopt the final documents to achieve global governance by the year 2000. Does anybody know about a meeting that's going on in Rome right now? How many of you are familiar with the International Criminal Court? That meeting is going on in Rome as we speak. Thursday, they are supposed to produce a document creating the International Criminal Court. This is the world conference Maurice Strong wrote about in 1995. Another recommendation is to eliminate the veto power of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and to remove the permanent status of the permanent members of the Security Council and to expand the Security Council to 23 members that rotate on a geographic basis. I don't need to address the implications of that recommendation. Another recommendation is to create a new Economic Security Council for the purpose of consolidating all global financial mechanisms along with the World Trade Organization and the United Nations Development Program. That is now underway as one of the high priority recommendations being implemented by Maurice Strong according to his report of last July. Another recommendation is to but to restructure the United Nations Trusteeship Council. Now, I'm sure that you will be glad as a taxpayer to know that the United Nations Trusteeship Council that has been around since 1945 has not had anything to do since 1993, when the last colony achieved its independence. So Maurice and the boys decided, well, we've already got the structure, we may as well give them a job. We will put the Trusteeship Council in charge of the Global Commons. Aha! That's a wonderful thing to do, but we'll have to restructure it because the existing members of the Trusteeship Council were concerned about colonization and they don't know anything about the Global Commons. So let's make it a 23-member council and let's appoint members from civil society as the trustees. You know who that is? Civil society is defined to be those NGOs that are accredited by the United Nations. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the World Wildlife Fund, the World Resources Institute, the Sierra Club, the Temple of Understanding, and on. You get the point. So you can expect to see, if Mr. Strong's recommendations are implemented, people like Jay Hare, people like Dave Foreman, sitting on the Trusteeship Council to have control or trusteeship over the Global Commons. Now, what would you think the Global Commons are, according to our global neighborhood? Well, I'll tell you. I think you can find it on page 251, because it's highlighted a lot in my book. It says, the Global Commons consist of outer space, the atmosphere, non-territorial seas, and the related environment that supports human life. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. How would you like to have a 23-member council, trusteeship at the United Nations level, making ultimate decisions over the related environment that supports human life? Well, that's the recommendation. Another recommendation, and the last one that I'll mention, is calling for the creation of an assembly of the people. This assembly of the people is to be 300 to 600 selected representatives from civil society that will meet for 2 weeks prior to the convening of the UN General Assembly to provide direct input to the delegates to the United Nations General Assembly. Now, Maurice Strong has announced in his a report of last year that the first meeting of the Assembly of the People will occur in the year 2000 to celebrate the sustainable millennium. These are just a few of the recommendations contained in our global neighborhood, many of which are being implemented daily as we speak. Now, what does all of this have to do with the Kyoto Protocol? And I'm not even going to address global warming or the science or the politics. I'm only going to speak to Article 2. Article 2 of the Kyoto Protocol, at the very last minute in Kyoto, was added to include carbon sinks as a factor in the measurement of achieving the reductions required in the Kyoto Protocol. Does that get you excited or what? I talked to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal till I was blue in the face, trying to explain the significance of the addition of that clause in Article 2 in the Kyoto Protocol. And he went away scratching his head, and I'm absolutely sure that he thinks that a carbon sink is a black one. I mean, the significance of this particular clause in the protocol goes back to 1976, when there was another UN meeting that took place in Vancouver, British Columbia, a meeting of the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements, Habitat 1, if you will. They produced a report after meeting 2 weeks, and agenda item 10 of that report is called Land, just land. It is 65 pages of very specific recommendations about land. And I want to quote you just a couple of sentences from the preamble to that section. It says, land cannot be considered as an ordinary asset, subject to the inefficiencies of the marketplace. Private ownership of land is the primary cause of the concentration and accumulation of wealth. Private ownership of land, therefore, contributes to social injustice. Land use, therefore, must be publicly controlled. That's the preamble. And then we go on to very specific recommendations, like every nation should create as a matter of urgency a national commission to allocate the distribution of population according to the availability of resources. It goes on to say that any unearned gain in the value of land that is privately owned must be recaptured for public benefit. Read it. The entire report is on our website. But it lays out very clearly the United Nations policy on land use. Maybe I should say on land use control. It is the firm belief of the United Nations that private property is an obstacle to the implementation of the global agenda. Therefore, private property must be eliminated. Now, as someone suggested this morning relating to the wetlands issue and the endangered species issue, the government doesn't have enough money, nor can it create enough to buy the privately owned land. Therefore, rather than even concern itself about acquiring it legally as the Constitution sets forth, we will simply control the use of land. And now, what happens? If you can't use your land for economic gain, you gotta move. Go to the Northwest. Arthur can tell you something about what's happened up there in the logging community, where our government has given, essentially,